Hi there, this is Johnny at Man and Machine. This is going to be a walkthrough on Enscape. So it's going to be fairly in-depth. It's going to go through all of the functions and features as of March 2020. So there's been a couple of new features recently added which are pretty cool. But it's going to be a general how-to on Enscape in general. So I'm going to jump straight into it. I'm going to actually use the Revit file that Enscape have given. So you can go onto their website and you can download this model if you wanted to have a look at anything that we're looking at today. I've made a couple of changes to it just to sort of demonstrate some of the other things that Enscape can do, but much of this is exactly the same as the one that was downloaded. So first of all, Enscape is a plugin to Revit and many other applications as well. So it works with Vectorworks and SketchUp and potentially some others, I'm not quite sure, but we're going to be looking specifically at Revit. So just to jump straight into how you get this Enscape, you would just download the add-in, and once you've downloaded the add-in, essentially you would have this ribbon that you can see here at the top. There is a 14-day free trial if you want to try this out with your Revit. You'll need a full version of Revit, so this will not work with Revit LT. So to get into Enscape, I've got my model here. We can have a quick look in 3D what this is going to look like. It's a fairly decent sized model, so we've got a lot of trees, and we have this house that we'll be looking at here. So most of the materials have been added inside of here. Some of them are custom, some of them are not custom, but many of the Enscape settings we're looking at will just be as it is out of the box. So all we need to do to start Enscape is just hit the start button at the top here. So once we hit start, it's going to open up our Enscape window. If you want this to work a little bit faster, if you're working on a bigger project, if you just set the render quality down, and we will look at how to do that in a bit. Once this opens up, it's actually tethered directly to Revit. So any changes we make in Revit will be reflected in Enscape. So this is really handy if you want to sit with a customer or a client and make some changes to the finishes of your design, and for them to be able to see that updated live in a render. So it includes moving pieces of the model around, changes to furniture, changes to materials. Everything that happens inside of your inside of Revit will be happening inside of Enscape, and we will have a look at that once we're inside this model. So just while that loads up, shouldn't take too much longer. Just to look at the ribbon we've got along the top here. There's lots of different options, but Enscape itself is actually a very simple program to use. We'll be looking at some of the options to be able to render out images, so JPEGs and things like that to your local hard drive. You can actually render them directly into Revit, but we'll go through all of those features through this how-to. So once the model's open, if you've ever played any kind of game on the computer, you'll be fully aware of the WASD style walking around, getting around. And I'm holding down control to go a bit faster here because I was quite a long way from my model. So what I'm actually going to do, just to make this a little bit easier for myself and for everybody viewing, I'm going to just dock my view here. So I've got my Revit open on the left and Enscape open on the right. So you've got all the controls down here at the bottom, and I'll just go through all these first. So if you wanted to use Enscape immediately and you just wanted to download and get going, it is as simple as just hitting start and then getting used to navigating your model. So I'm clicking with my left mouse clicker here and then holding down and just dragging around to essentially look around as though I was standing at this spot looking at this model. Then I've got the, like I said, the WASD keys to move around. What you'll notice here is that as I walk up these steps, you'll see the bump as I'm walking up the steps. So I'm actually in what's called walk mode at the moment. So this space here at the bottom will allow me to, so if I hit spacebar, I can actually use the E and the Q buttons here to fly up if I wanted to, or bring myself down, so hit the Q button here, or if I wanted to fall, so best not to do this while you're in VR, standing there, standing in midair, but if you hit the spacebar again, you will fall down to the ground with the gravity on. So once you're in walk mode, you do have collision on. I can't walk through the sofas, I can't walk sort of through walls. The only thing I can walk through in walk mode is doors. So this, as long as it's categorized as a door inside of Revit, I'll be able to walk through it, which is very handy when you're getting around your model. Otherwise, you very quickly get used to just hitting spacebar super quickly just to walk through a quick window. So I'm just clicking spacebar there just as I walk through the window, and then as soon as I'm on the other side, I hit spacebar again to turn back into walk mode. So some of the other controls we've got down here, we've got a mini map. So the M button there will get the mini map up. This is really, really handy when you're in a really big model and you just want to get somewhere quickly. So this is a map of where I actually am on my model at the level that I'm looking at it in. So if I just sort of work around there, you can see that the white pin I have is looking the direction that I am on the map as the same direction I am looking on the screen. So if I click inside, I go inside. But like I say, really handy if you have a huge model and you need to be able to navigate really quickly. So I'm just going to close that down, save a little bit of space. So the next option you've got is the video editor, which I will go through now just because it's part of those tools down the bottom there. So if I hit K, it's going to take me into the video editor. So this is how we can create videos inside of Enscape. And this is really neat the way this works and really smooth as well. So what you do once you're in the video editor is if I press K again, I'm actually going to create a little keyframe. So what I'm going to do then is just move over here. I'm going to hit K again, and I will have created this kind of like Donnie Darko style tube that comes out of your chest. But I now have two keyframes, and then the tube represents where the camera is going to follow. So then I might create another keyframe just out here. So I've got now potentially what I might want to show or a video that I might want to create. What I can actually do before I create the video is I can click on each of these keyframes. I can move them around, change where they're looking if I need to change it. I can change the time of the day, so you can have those nice visuals where you've got kind of the panorama of the building, and then the time of the day is changing to nighttime, so the lights will come on and you'll see it at different times of the day, just to add a bit of depth to your video. So I'm just going to hit back. What I can do before I decide to sort of set this to render, so maybe create a WMV file, I can just preview this just to see what it's going to look like. So you can see it's quite a steady, nice kind of camera pan. You can set it to a shaky camera angle to make it a bit more kind of like just maybe a bit more depth. But it's really easy to create quick, quite stunning video visuals with Enscape using this video editor. So the shaky camera here is just down the bottom and easing out. I'm just going to leave that. And so K, the shortcut K there takes you to the video editor, and that's really, really easy to use. There's really not much to it, and obviously because you can create keyframes, you can go upstairs, you're not confined to a plane, you can go around corners and things like that, and then you can edit those cameras afterwards depending on how the preview looks. So one of the really new features inside of Enscape, which is really cool if you're kind of maybe a little bit more developed inside of your design, you kind of maybe want to see a bit of the information about some of the objects you have. So maybe you might want to know what the manufacturer is of this sofa. What you can do is you could hit B, and you'll actually be able to click on objects inside your view. So I could click on this sofa here, and I would get information that's coming from Revit and being populated inside of Enscape. So this is really handy if you just want to kind of see a bit of information about things, perhaps, I don't know, check on the supplier or the manufacturer or the finish of something, click on the floor and find the material that's being used perhaps. But this is a really, really neat feature to help you get a big part of BIM is the information, and this just helps you kind of get the information from multiple different programs. You're not confined to just looking at the render, you actually have the information about things here as well, which is really handy. So like I say, that's quite a new feature. So the last couple of things that are left down here are the rotate, which I've been using this whole time, the left click, being able to just pan around. But what's really neat as well is the orbit function. This was added a little while ago, but it's a fairly new feature. So you just right click, and wherever your right click happens, your orbit center will take effect. So I'm using the left click mouse here, and I'm just moving my mouse around to orbit around the building. And if you were creating a video, this is a really neat way to get your keyframes in sort of centering around a position. So if you wanted to focus on, say, this seating area here, I could use my left click, start my video and create my keyframes so that I'm just rotating around a focal point. So that's a really neat feature, that orbit. So the last thing is the time of day. Changing the time of day is a case of holding down shift and again the left mouse click, and you'll see a little clock in the bottom right hand corner of Enscape there that tells me what time. I'll just get rid of, so H will get rid of my keyboard shortcuts there. So left click, right click, and shift, if I just move this left to right, will change the time of day. So what you'll notice, just to mention here, is that if you do head to the nighttime, first of all, you do get things like stars, which you can't see in this model, they must be turned down, but you also get the lighting turning on inside your model. So this is just something that happens when you change the time of day. As sort of sunrise comes, the lights will turn off and you'll then get the shadows. But what's really neat about this feature is it's looking at the coordination inside of Revit. So if you wanted to, say, get the right time of day and see the actual shadows, you can use the sun paths inside of Revit. And if you had, say, I don't know, maybe some trees in your model that couldn't be moved, and you wanted to have a look at how those trees are going to create shadows in your model, as long as your model inside of Revit is coordinated, the time of day that you see there bottom left will exactly reflect the kind of shadows and the height of the sun at a particular time of year in your model. So that can be really handy if you just want to get a gauge on sort of shadows and things like that in your model. I'll go into more detail. There is the option to change the view you've got here to see lux levels, so you can see where you've got high spots, low spots, and things like that. Okay, so that's pretty much getting around. I'll press H just to get my little shortcuts bar down the bottom here. Couple of other options at the top here. You've got the option to change it to a perspective, 2-point, or orthographic view. So then that might be handy if you wanted to get, say, a really sort of nice elevation on your model. This one just has a lot of shrubbery in the way, but if I was looking perhaps at the side on my model and I don't want any perspective, then I could do that if I want to. And you've got 2-point there as well. The angel wings in the right hand corner is spacebar essentially, so if I click on that I will fall to the ground as I did before. So that's how you get around Enscape. If you just wanted to use Enscape as it is, without learning any of the other tools, just having a nice pretty render to look at, this is as simple as it is. It's just a case of pressing start, it's linked to your model, whatever you've got in your 3D view you will have in your Enscape view. So onto that point, one of the other options we've got, so what I'm going to do now is dive into some of the options I have along here inside of Revit. So one of the options just next to where I started Enscape from is this active document. So in here I have a list of all of the views I've got in my model. So what I could do is, because all I need to do is just click on one of these and it will take me to that view specifically in Enscape, is let's say I was with a customer, or let's say I was about to meet a customer and I knew the sort of places that they wanted to look at, or perhaps I had a conversation with them and they knew what parts of the model they wanted to look at. You could set your cameras up inside of Revit, just like I am here. So it's just using the cameras inside of the standard cameras you get from Revit to create all the views that I want to discuss with the customer. And then once I've done that, if I head back to my Enscape, I'll have that particular view that I've just created, so 3D view 1 here. I'd obviously name it something. I might have a list of those, and if I click on those, I can go directly to those views inside of Enscape. So like I say, that's really handy if you want to pre-set up all of the views before you start sitting down with a customer and just going through stuff. So on that note, what I'll do is I'll just quickly demonstrate the live link between Revit and Enscape. Because if you set all these views up, you're likely that you're going to be saying, well, let's change materials, let's maybe add some furniture or change some components around. So what I'm going to do here is, perhaps the customer doesn't like the floor, and I'll do this in the view that I've actually just created, just to highlight how easy this is to do. So I can click the floor, let's say. Hopefully you've got a bit of Revit knowledge here. All I'm going to do is just change the material I'm using on that particular floor from the tiles that I've got here. And perhaps they want sort of a wood, I think it's called fishbone style. So you'd need to have this material set up. Enscape's going to use some of the options I have in here, things like bump mapping, reflectance, transparency, etc., to figure out what it's actually doing. So it will actually bump map what I'm about to put down. So this is a wooden floor. I'm just going to click OK and update that. So I guess maybe if I was sitting with a customer, they might have a sort of a mood board or something, a list of materials that I might have pre-set up to be able to look at. So you can see here now that I've changed it from the tiles to the wood. You can see there that there's a bit of bump mapping on the wood, probably just about the right amount really, to give those kind of mitered edges on the woodwork there. So that's an example of the materials updating. The other thing, I guess, that we might need in this space here is a sofa. So that's going to be a bit difficult to do in the view that I'm in there. So I'm just going to head to a plan view. And then what I can do in here is I could head to the components in my model. And I'm going to show you where all of these components have come from, because Enscape actually give you a huge library of components to be able to use. So I'm just going to put this sofa roughly in where I think maybe it would want to go, just here. And then I'll just explain where that came from. So that's just going to wear away once I've hit the escape key and placed what I need to place inside my model. But once that's come in, I could sort of pan around, have a look at exactly whether that's what I want. But that's as simple as it is. It is completely linked to your Revit model. So anything that changes in your Revit model is going to update inside of Enscape. So I guess it's really useful if you want to do things on the fly with a customer and not go through maybe long render times to be able to see your work finished. So what I'm going to quickly do, just before I forget, is to show you where that sofa came from, some of the items that we have here. So if I just move along the ribbon I've got along the top here, I will mention this just so I don't miss it out. If you have a Oculus Rift or a HTC or any of those items, you can enable VR in a one-click button here. So that'll, as long as you've got it connected to computer and set up, you can just hit enable, and what you see in Enscape will be directly fed into a VR kit. Any changes you make are also live, so you could actually update the model with the customer perhaps in the VR headset, and they can make decisions in that headset. And it couldn't just be a customer, it could be designers working together on models. I've seen Enscape being used on projects right next to Revit while you work. So you can get an idea of perspective, material finishes, and things like that. But to show you the asset library and where some of the stuff has come, what I'll do is I'll just add a quick person so you can see this. So asset library is underneath our tools here. And at the moment, there's about 1,600 different models that Enscape have given in Revit to be able to just place into your model and just give a bit of context. So what I could do here is maybe just add maybe a person. Just add, what should we add here? We'll add Amy. She's just going to be standing, I guess, in the living room. So all I need to do, and this is going to download these and then pop them into my model. So these aren't sitting on your sitting inside your templates or anything like that. They are an external library. So just going to let that wear away, and what I should see is Amy will then just appear in my model. So these are for finishing touches, really, these assets here. They're designed so that you can add things to your models that are going to add a bit of detail. So things like these coffee machines, olive bottles, etc. They're just things that make the model look really real once it's all built up. So what I'm going to just quickly discuss is all of the features along the ribbon. So this won't take too much longer. I'll just quickly have a look at some other parts of the model so you can kind of get an idea of what this looks like and how you might use this. So you could have a look around here, head up to the balcony. I could maybe just change the time of day. I'm not doing anything here that we haven't already talked about. I'm just using the shift and right click to change the time of day. So sliding right to left. So if you kind of imagine that maybe I'm happy with some of the views that I've got, I might want to take a couple of renders or use some of the images I've got. I've added this nice sofa, so I might as well kind of maybe take advantage of that. If I get a nice image ready to be able to render, the tools I've got are to be able to render the image that I have. So if I click on this, I could render the views that we've created from Revit, but I'm going to use the current Enscape viewport here and just click render. What that's then going to do is allow me just to save somewhere locally, so I can hit save here on my desktop, and that's just going to wear away and render the image that I have here. So just very quickly to have a look at that image, I've just got this open on my other screen. If I find the Enscape image, I think this is the right one, yeah. I've got a nice JPEG that I could send to somebody if I needed to. That looks quite nice. The other option I have under render image is render into document. So it's going to do the same thing, except this time it's going to render that image into my views here. So what this means is I can put it on a sheet, which is really, really handy. Getting a bit of context, you've got a much better kind of image than you'd get from Revit in there, but I can just put that on a sheet. So really handy, obviously, when you want to keep all of the renders and things like that in the document as you work. So some of the other options you have to be able to communicate your designs, you have the Exes standalone, and this is a file that you can send to somebody. It's going to be a fairly large file, but it means that they can view the model exactly as we are here in Enscape without needing Enscape or Revit. They're going to just get an executable file that will just open up, allow them to walk around, change the time of day. They can't change anything in the model at all, but they'll be able to view it with all the material finishes exactly as we are here. And just to show you what that looks like, if I just open up my desktop, I've done one previously. So this is the file that you would see. So this is Enscape_Villa. It's, like I say, it's a fairly large file in this case, but you'd be able to send this to a customer. I think this one's in the region of 500 megabytes. It's just quite a lot in it. You can send that to a customer and they can just view it exactly, like I say, exactly like we are here. The other option, which is a bit more useful, I suppose, if you have customers or clients perhaps that need to view it, but their machines might, I don't know, maybe a Chromebook, they're not quite as powerful, they might kind of, they're not going to get the same experience, I suppose. So what you can do is you can create a web standalone, and I've actually already sent this to the cloud so I can show you what this looks like. Essentially what it does is it uploads your model to the Enscape servers, and it allows you to create a link to be able to send to people via just a browser method. So they are literally just using any browser they've got to be able to view the Enscape model. It's not going to look quite as good as what you see in Enscape here. So one of the things that it won't do is, we haven't looked at this yet, but you might be able to see this. The grass is bump mapped, so every individual blade of grass here is being rendered. So that's something that won't happen online, and it won't be quite as crisp, but it gives you really good depth and a really, like, as a tool, as something quick to be able to view, it's very good. I'll let that load up. While it loads up, I'll just explain another one of the tools we've got here. So what I was doing earlier inside of Revit was creating 3D views so that I could view those inside of Enscape. And I can actually go the other way around. So in my tools here, I've got the option to be able to create a 3D view. So I'm looking here at the front of my building. I can hover over tools. I can hit create 3D view. I'm just going to call it Enscape 3D view 1, hit OK. And that's going to add that particular view. So if I just double click on it inside of my Revit, I've got exactly the same view now inside of Revit. So that means that if I wanted to, I could actually create the views inside of Enscape rather than Revit, or I could create the views inside of Revit rather than Enscape, and go backwards or forwards. So really handy for setup. So it's probably, no, still just loading. So while that's still loading, I'll go through a couple of the other tools that we have in the ribbon. You can save the paths that you've created for your model. So that keyframe path that we created earlier with the K key, I can save those paths and I can load previous paths that I've created. So that really just allows you to save the videos that you might have wanted to create. You've also got the option at the end here to render the video that you have created. So the paths that you've used, you could render those videos. And like I say, you can save those to a video file. So that's the .mp4 files. That's going to take a little while, so I won't be able to demonstrate that, but they look pretty crisp. So they're all of the video options that we've got. The next is panoramas. So we can actually take a rendered 360 image of our model, and we could use that, I don't know, to add to perhaps to give to somebody to be able to stand in a place and see everything. You've also got the option at the bottom here to create a stereo panorama, or sorry, a panorama for a Google Cardboard, which means you could put that into a phone, an app on a phone, and they give it to somebody. As long as they got a Google Cardboard or any of the viewing devices that you have to be able to put your phone in, they can actually stand in a position and just look around the model. So that can be really useful if you just want to give somebody a couple of stills where they can sort of view certain parts of the model. So the browser has just loaded. So this is on Google Chrome. You can see that it's still pretty good as a model. I can use the arrow keys here to walk around. I've got the space bar. I've got a lot of the tools that I had. Right click and then orbit. I can still shift, change the time of day, and I'm doing this all on the browser. So I'm not using any software here. I'm doing everything via Google Chrome in this case. And it still gives me a really good indication of perspective of the model, the material finishes, the positions of things, and how things are going to look. So really useful tool when you want to share your model with people. So we've looked at some of the options there along the ribbon. We're getting towards sort of looking at most of the options in here now. One of the other options we have is the ability to place sound in our model. So I can click on place sound, and I can choose an MP3 sound to maybe add things like bird sounds or people talking, etc. And this just adds a bit of depth to videos and things like that. And the way that works is you would hit place sound, choose where you want to place it. So I'm just going to pop it here. It's then going to ask you which sounds would you like, so I'll choose restaurant sounds here. And essentially that's all you need to do. As you walk closer to that sound, you will hear whatever sound it is that you've played. So typically you're going to want something on loop. So what we're going to look at now is the major settings for Enscape and the views that we're looking at. So if I look around my model here, I've got the options, a couple of visual options that I can change that will just give the finishing touches to the model. So like I say, as is, I have actually left this pretty much out of the box. So if you were to click start, this is pretty much what you get. Most of the options I've put in these visual styles, if you click on the ends of these, you can reset the default, and that's what I have. But things that you can change, so we've got different styles. You can say I want a bit more of an outline on things. This gives a bit of kind of the idea that things are a bit more conceptual. You can change to a polystyrene view, which is going to take off all the materials. So they're, again, more conceptual looking. We haven't kind of got anything set in stone. We're still designing things. And then I did mention earlier the light view. This allows you, if I change this perhaps to a nighttime view, to see where you might have dark spots in your model. So perhaps in my room, we've got a light issue on the stairs. There's no light sort of upstairs or here. And I might want to address that. But this is by no means a formal way of checking the lux levels. It would just be a way of kind of making quick decisions about where you might have low levels of light as early design stages perhaps. So just set that down, turn that up, and then turn it back to daytime view. So some of the other options, camera-wise, we have exposure, really overexposed, underexposed. So camera settings, we've got field of view, so the more or less we see, perhaps a bit of an estate agent view. We've got render quality, so I can turn this right up, perhaps, from draft, and that's just going to wear away just a little bit more than it was doing. It'll just add a bit of depth. So if I change this to medium, you see there that the shadows just get more and more defined. And actually, if you just leave this wearing away, some of the noise you get here will start to disappear, and the image gets crisper and crisper. So I'm just going to put that back down to medium. So in terms of the image, the image tab we have along the top here, these are a lot of the tools you would get, or finishing tools that you get inside of Photoshop. Things like vignette around the outside, bit of bloom, so kind of making it look like there's a bit of water on the camera almost, if you've done that with your iPhone before. More or less shadows, highlights, etc. These are things to just mess around with to make the image look how you'd like it to look. We've got things in atmosphere that we can change. Again, this is just finishing touches. It's just making it look how you'd want to look. So you've got things like fog, if you want more fog, the height of the fog. So making it look maybe a bit like a thriller video. The sun brightness, how bright the sun is. Night sky brightness. So you can change how many sort of stars there are. The moon size. I'm not sure where the moon is tonight. But there's lots and lots of different settings just to do with the atmosphere, essentially. Probably one of the more important ones in this case is the skybox. So this is the horizon part here. So at the moment it's set to urban. I can set this to mountains, and you'll see that the background changes. And you can add your own to this. So all you need to do is maybe go to some of the online free resources. I'll just go onto the roof here. And you'll be able to download some of these skyboxes and add them into Enscape if you wanted to. But these are the ones out of the box. They're usually pretty good. And this model in particular, they've actually modeled all of the topography and the trees around anyway inside of Revit. So perhaps if you had a tree survey or something like that, that might be something you do anyway. And you can also change the rotation of that skybox as well if you need to. And you've got lots of options in terms of what you want to do with the cloud. So things like down to contrails, the amount of lines that you have in the sky where the planes have been, and this is just again adding depth and things like that. So these would be things you change sort of to finishing touches. Finally, you've got the capture, so this is the videos, what you want the compression to be, the frames per second to be, etc. So again, sort of finishing touches. General settings, these are just things like mouse speed. Probably something to mention here is in the Revit setting down at the bottom, you've got the option to set a live Revit camera, which will essentially create a camera inside of Revit that will follow where your camera is inside of Enscape. You've also got the option to change between appearance and graphics for the material selection. So if you're looking at what this is looking at, it's when you go to your materials library inside of Revit, you've got appearance as a tab and graphics as a tab. So graphics is going to give you a shaded, a much kind of lesser view of your model. But it's using the shades inside your materials rather than the appearances. So I'll just set that back. Hopefully that'll just quickly update. So in terms of how this works, there's really only a couple more things that I need to mention perhaps. The grass that we're looking at here is bump mapped automatically. It's being bump mapped by the name of the material. So I've created a couple of different sets of grass here. So this grass that I've got set to this topography here, the material is called grass, or sorry, short grass. And then these grasses here, so this is slightly longer grass, just called grass, long grass, and wild grass. And to do that, like I said, it's just the name of the material. So if I head to materials and just quickly show you these, it's these here. So I have grass, long grass, short grass, and wild grass. And all you need to do is just name your materials, those things, and it will, Enscape will just bump map automatically. So we've got slightly wilder grass and the short grass here for sort of, I suppose, a more Mona effect. So I think that's pretty much a flyby of everything inside of Revit and a sort of how-to on how it works. It is a really simple program to use and to get some really good results from. The asset library, a lot of the components we're looking at here are using the asset library, but it works just as well if you spend some time with the materials inside of Revit, adding things like bump mapping, then you can get some really, really decent outputs from Enscape. And it's really immediate what you get as well. And those changes happening automatically with the changes inside of Revit are really helpful. That has just reminded me just very quickly, last of all, if you don't want those live updates to happen, you can actually pause them by clicking on the pause live updates. So if you pause them, it means you can make lots of changes inside of Revit, unpause them, and then everything will update inside of Enscape. That can be useful if you, say, have this set to ultra and you don't want it to kind of update every second you're changing anything inside of Revit. So you do have the option to stop that from happening. Okay, so I think that's everything. If you have any questions, please call Man and Machine. Hopefully this has been useful. But yeah, thank you for watching.